Hello, everyone. I am Jaira Knight, the Professional Development Director here at First 3 Years. First 3 Years is a statewide nonprofit with the mission to educate, advocate, and collaborate to advance the healthy development of infants, toddlers, and their families. On behalf of First 3 Years, we would like to welcome you to the second day of the 2022 Build Up Conference. We are thrilled that you are joining us again today. Before we get started, I just want to begin with a moment of mindfulness to ground us for today's session.
Hi, and welcome to Headspace. So no matter what's going on in your life right now, no matter how many thoughts are racing around your mind, no matter how the body's feeling, just take a moment to sit down and take a big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you breathe in, a sense of taking in fresh air, the lungs expanding. As you breathe out, a sense of letting go of any stress in the body, in the mind, just feeling the muscles soften and relax. And close your eyes if you'd like to. One more. Breathing deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just take a moment to pause. Allow the thoughts to come and go. And then just gently opening the eyes again.
Thank you so much for taking that moment with me. I hope that you all were able to find a moment to focus on your breathing and to find calm and prepare yourself for the amazing information to come today. Yesterday, we heard from Ms. Robin Gobel on the importance of helping children reach brain regulation through playful interventions. So we want to hear from you. Please log in to menti.com and use the code 58288894 or click the link that has been provided in the chat box and answer this question. What are 1 to 2 words to describe a key takeaway from yesterday's session? I'll give you a moment to do that. All righty, I see some coming in already. I see relationships, brain health, connection, play to build, engagement, resourcefulness, very insightful, intentional, playfulness, relationships, strengths-based, absolutely, rapport, fun, proactive versus reactive, I like that, reciprocity, effective communication, care, sensory, engaged. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so, so much for participating in that Menti. We are so thrilled that you walked away from yesterday's sessions with more tools to assist young children and their families. Now you will see today's agenda displayed. Today's sessions will be presented by Mr. John Badalment. He will present a lecture with additional workshop time. His presentation will lead participants on a journey to explore how their own attitudes, biases, and assumptions about fathers play a significant role in creating a father-friendly environment and rapport. Attendees will have the opportunity to focus on practical and culturally sensitive strategies and tools for integrating fathers into existing services or creating new opportunities. There are a few more things I want to cover before we hear from Mr. Badalment. Again, I want to share a very special thank you to our conference sponsors, United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, Help Me Grow North Texas, and Kaplan Early Learning Company. Please be sure to check out our virtual exhibit hall, and the link will be available for you in the chat box. Please remember that each session has a different Zoom link. After today's morning keynote, you will leave the webinar and access the link for the workshop meeting. We will add the link for the meeting prior to the conclusion of this session. Additionally, all links have been emailed to you, and if you have not received these links, please reach out to us at info@first3yearstx.org. At the end of today, you will also be emailed a survey. This survey will allow you to provide feedback and also gain access to your CEU. Due to new Zoom policies, please be sure to type your name and email address in the chat box to ensure that you receive credit for attending today's session. And if you are an early intervention specialist and you need an EIS training certificate, please email info@first3yearstx.org. If you experience any technical difficulties today, you can reach out to us at techsupport@first3yearstx.org. And don't forget, as you are enjoying your day today, if you snap a screenshot or a selfie, be sure to tag us on social media at First3Years on all social platforms. The keynote session for the upcoming session is known as the Julie Ann Mason Memorial Lecture, and it is underwritten by the Jerry M. Lewis Foundation. Thank you to the foundation for your continuous support and for supporting the memory of Julie Ann Mason and her work in our field. Now for the moment we have been waiting for. I'm so excited to introduce our speaker for today. John Badalment is the proud father of 2 teenagers. He is an accomplished writer, educator, consultant, speaker, and documentary filmmaker. John is the author of The Modern Dad's Dilemma: How to Stay Connected with Your Kids in a Rapidly Changing World, and the director of the PBS documentary film, All Men Are Sons, Exploring the Legacy of Fatherhood. Over the past 2 decades, he has spoken and consulted internationally in schools, government agencies, nonprofits, and private sector organizations. In 2012, John was invited to the White House for President Obama's Champions of Change Father's Day meeting with cabinet members and national leaders. Again, in 2016, he was invited to the White House for the Obama administration's first ever Forum on Men's Health. Currently, John is the Director of Training and Education at Fathering Together. He is also a senior consultant at Orange Grove Consulting. Orange Grove Consulting is a woman-owned business specializing in research-based leadership development and bias removal. Prior to joining Fathering Together, John served as the Director of Programs for the Fatherhood Project at the Massachusetts General Hospital. His work has been featured on ABC News, CBS Sunday Morning, National Public Radio, and other major media outlets. He has been a contributing blogger at HuffPost, The Good Man Project, and U.S. News and World Report. John was recognized in the New York Times by the organization Futures Without Violence as one of their heroes for his commitment to ending violence against women and children. John holds a master's degree from the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. Please help me welcome John Badalment. Thank you so much, Mr. Badalment, for your time and your expertise today.
No matter how many times we practice it, I still had a little problem there. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, get our slides up, make sure everyone can see it. Okay, thumbs up. Jaira, yes. Excellent, thank you. Okay, welcome and thank you all very much for taking your time today to be with us and to look at this question of how do we engage dads? How do we do a better job today as professionals working with families in the very early stages of parenting, and how do we help get dads more involved? I think of this as a two-way street. It's probably more than two, but the main two ways being that dads, men, father figures, and I'll say more about that language in a moment, need to make change, need to step up. Okay, that's one way. The other way is that institutions, organizations, individuals, professionals also need to open up and reach out. So it's a two-way street, is not a zero sum. I do not believe that engaging fathers, engaging men in children's lives, in family life, means that we have to detract from women in any way. That sounds very, I think that's important. It's also very complicated. And we'll get into some of we won't get too deep into the politics, because I really want to make sure you leave here with some new information and knowledge and practical tools. This is really, and Jaira made this very clear from the get-go. This is really, it's important to me that you leave feeling like you have something that you can use. And so today, the keynote, right now, I'm going to talk a little bit. We're going to see a couple videos. The workshop, I really appreciate people taking this big block of time. The workshop is where we're going to do the practical, where the rubber meets the road, if you will. Okay, so that's where, and there will be exercises that you can, again, take away, and really you could use them tonight. That's how practical I try to be. So let me look at chat. All right, I'm going to try and not look at the chat. Jaira said she's going to bust in and say something if I need to hear it, if there's a question. Okay, is that good, Jaira? A little thumbs up. All right, there it is. Thank you. I was starting to get worried. Okay, so that's the overview. Real quick, terms are important. Excuse me. Language is important. And I just want to say, like I said a little bit earlier, the term father, dad, fatherhood, mother, mom, motherhood, parent, there are, when I say dad and father, they're interchangeable, and they're also inclusive, and they're meant to. So, and there will be times where I will ask you to think or do an activity that's specific to biological father, and I'll make that clear when necessary. But my assumption is that, and part of what this work is about for me, is about expanding the definitions of masculinity and manhood to be synonymous, to include nurturing and caring and fathering, if you will. In other words, that we still, I think, have, as men, not done a great job, and I'll again get into this, of incorporating the human quality, the very human quality of being connected, of caring, of being relational. So that's part of this work, is about expanding these terms as well. Families, again, people, my assumption, and of course, if there's questions or you need a clarification, do let me know. I try to be interactive. This is, obviously the format does provide for some of that, but even when I'm, in a live auditorium, I do like a back and forth. I don't like it when people just yell out things in the middle of when I'm talking, but that's okay too if it needs to be said. So I just want to acknowledge that the idea of family is that family is changing. The sort of traditional structure of the family is like a quarter of all families. And I myself was married for 17 years. I'm a divorced dad, which I don't even really like that term because it's very negative focused. It's like, I'm not defined by that. I also am in a partnership, and I have a girlfriend, which also is another term I'm not very comfortable with because I'm 53 and it just feels a little weird. Anyway, the language is important here. And I want to acknowledge that I'm assuming that you work with all different kinds of families, and that we all in our work and in our personal lives encounter different types of families, different family structures, and it's important to be inclusive in that way, both in the language and of family and the language of parenting. Okay, any questions? I know that Jaira will shout them out to me. Okay, or need for clarification. All right, so quick plan for today. The keynote, as I said, my goal is really to set the stage, set some context, and you see a couple videos, one of them funny, one of them much more serious, try to balance that. And then I want to share some research with you. The slides are all available and they will be given to you depending on how the time goes. I'll get to the research, how deep we get into it in the keynote. That will be a question of how the first part goes. But research is important. And one of the most important things I like to say that our job as people working with fathers and with families is that research, especially today, that research does matter. Information matters. And especially with fatherhood, what I've experienced in 20 plus years of working with dads is that they really do like to know, they like information. I'm generalizing here, but we have a study actually that we did to back that up as I think of it. But I think everybody likes to know there's some information, there's some basis for this. So again, we'll get to the research, and if I zip through it in the keynote, I'll come back to it in the workshop. Okay. The workshop, as I said, is really going to be practical, and we're going to go through, we'll do some breakouts there as well. Okay. Dad objectives. This is pretty self-explanatory. Understanding, identifying. I do want you to take away practical interventions, no matter what your role is, and that's why I put individual, staff, institutional level. We're going to try to kind of, go between those different modes. So I'm aware, and that's always the challenge of talking about parenting with big groups of people that mostly do the same thing, but there's always people that, there may be some lawyers out there, there may be an early intervention, there are probably lots of early intervention people, social workers, just a parent. So I'll try to hit these sort of areas, individual, staff, and institutional. I'm also a big believer in the connection between personal and professional, the interplay. I will lastly say, this is sort of the intro to the keynote. And I don't know if I worded this right, but I've come in writing books and in running groups, in meeting with dads individually, being a dad, being a man, and doing this since really, all my life, my personal story I won't touch on, but professionally since the early 90s, I've seen a huge shift in the research and in the sort of exposure of ideas about parenting. And the biggest shift I've seen is that we, in the research specifically, and pretty much the culture at large, I would say, is, and there's still pockets where the sort of more traditional old school view remains, but by and large, we have a body of research now, and that research has gone from focusing on absence and the problems that come with fatherlessness. If you think back to the early 90s, the late 80s, and the research goes back further than that, but there's been a big shift in the early 2000s, really over the last 10 years, just an explosion in research in every area: psychology, education, brain science, across the board. There's been a shift to what is it that how do dads impact for better and for worse? So I like to say this up front, and I really want institutions to embrace this. We're not there yet, I don't think, but the old idea of like, should we or shouldn't we engage dads? They don't care. We're not interested. They're not interested. Don't, sort of like, don't ask. There might be violence. And some of these are important questions and important issues to look at, but we cannot, with what we know, we cannot do work with families and not figure out how are we going to engage the dad, no matter where he is. So it's no longer a question of if or why engage dads. It's a question of how are we going to do it? Why? Because we know, and I know this personally, having grown up with a father that had a host of traumas himself that he passed on to me, and who I love very much, but also had a very difficult relationship with. I know, and I also have a stepfather, that there are ways my dad did great things, and there are also very negative aspects of that relationship. So it's both. In other words, dads have an impact one way or the other, oftentimes both. And hopefully we can move this a little further so that we can help dads, engage dads, to do more of the positive and less of the negative. So central question, I think really important. I think it's a mindset. How are we going to work with these guys wherever they are? I'm one of those guys. All right. Any questions? Jaira, do I need to clarify anything?
We do have one question. The question is, why do you feel that it's so important to be inclusive?
Of fathers in general, I think inclusivity and diversity is what makes humanity great. But in terms specifically of fathers, why is it important to be inclusive? Because fathers impact children's lives. They impact families' lives. Fathers, fatherhood is an avenue for men to improve. It's an avenue for men and women to improve. And ultimately, I think there are all kinds of, moms out there. There's all kinds of dads, and there's all kinds of men and women. And unfortunately, with manhood and masculinity, I think, which is why I think it's so important to be inclusive. Masculinity is still, I'm generalizing, I'll get into it, but is still not inclusive of different definitions, different qualities. So inclusivity is critical.
Thank you.
Hope that answers that. Because there's all kinds of dads, really. All right, paradigm shift, quick. Again, this is sort of touching on where we've been, where we're going. Problem focused, as I mentioned, sort of absence focused, to strengths based, to what do dads, instead of looking at how fatherlessness hurts children, which is, by the way, still critical. I didn't mean to imply that that's not important, because ironically, we live in a time where there are more children that do not have a close or even any connection with their own father, with their biological father than ever. So we're in a time of great fatherlessness, if you will. And we're also in a time of transition and transformation where I think fatherhood represents and is one of the most hopeful aspects of improving, children's lives, women's lives, and men's lives. And in that way, I think it's important that we acknowledge we're in a time of transition, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Institutional change is happening at different rates in different institutions. I've worked in most of these areas. I've certainly consulted and spoken with men and women, parents in these different areas. Education, schools has been my focus for many years, but in human services, I worked for 7 years at Mass General Hospital. So the change in terms of engaging fathers, addressing fatherhood is really still not consistent across the board at all. And in fact, I found that healthcare is sort of one of the slower, if you will, institutions to fully embrace the importance of fathers. That's not to say there aren't hospitals and healthcare providers that do understand that family-based, healthcare needs to include men. But I've seen it slower than, for example, human services. I found that human services, healthcare, human services, and education are kind of further along. I won't get into each of these areas, but suffice to say, we're in this time where institutionally it's very lopsided, right, in terms of the acknowledgement of the importance of fathers. All right, so the comments, if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. The way I see that clip is Dana Carvey is pretty, I think, hilariously and succinctly capturing this shift from the authoritarian, the quote, dictator father of past generations, the expectation that a dad would be the head of the household, which, still some people very much believe that. But to me, that traditional sense of, you don't question a father. And then the swing to the other side being the permissive parent, the parent, the inside voices. My kids are now 17 and 18. But I feel like I'm part of that generation that started using that, let's use our inside voices. Now, this is funny. This is meant to be comical. So I will get to the more serious issues around this sort of this bifurcated system we have. So this captures to me where we've been and where we are. I believe the way forward is we have somewhere got to find a medium. And I think that medium is about equality. It's about equity. It's about what's fair, what's just. And it's somewhere in between. Modern fatherhood is in transformation. And so the three qualities, and I'll say more about this in a moment, that I think we need as men, as fathers, as father figures, are these: self-awareness. There's different names for these things: self-awareness, self-understanding, or emotion, EQ, emotional intelligence, but some sense of who am I? What is my experience? Where do I come from? How does that influence who I am today, how I parent my kids, right? So that's the not one quality. Second quality is what I call emotional courage. And I make a very important distinction here. Courage, as it's sort of traditionally or often thought of as strength, which it is, I want to make a distinction between like the physical courage, the courage of running into a burning building, the courage it takes to stand in front of, to enter into a difficult situation. Emotional courage to me is about speaking from your heart, understanding what's going on inside of you, and then having the courage to express that and to use that courage to be connected, to care. So I'll get more into that in a moment, but another word for that we often hear of is vulnerability. And that's, I've read and watched a ton of Brene Brown, who's sort of popularized, I think, and brought the importance of vulnerability in relationships to the cultural forefront. And I think that's important. I also think that language does matter. And I think in my experience, I've seen that vulnerability has so many connotations to it that are so tied to negative experiences, to traditional limited masculinity, that I like this term courage, emotional courage, but they're synonymous in many ways. And I can talk about that more, but the third one is flexibility and adaptability. Things are changing. I don't need to tell you that. I will just, name a few. We could look at, our world at large. Most obviously in front of our faces is there's a war going on. There is sort of, I think we're seeing the worst of masculinity and manhood, and we're also seeing the best qualities, and we're seeing the best qualities of humans. I would like to get to a point where there isn't such a distinction between, qualities that are feminine and qualities that are masculine. There are human qualities that are important. And I think that's where we are today is men through fatherhood. We need to own those parts of ourselves, those human qualities that have been kind of cut off, in the way that girls and women, or I should say women, through the women's movement, through lots of large sort of societal changes, have really done an amazing job of owning both sides of humanity, qualities of being strong and sensitive, qualities of being assertive and connected, and a good listener and speaking up. So we'll get into those sort of really specific ways to address that. But today, more than ever, men, we need to help boys. And the way we're going to help boys and girls understand a different kind of manhood, I think, is through this transformation and owning both those human qualities. So those are the three areas we need. Yes, Jaira.
I think that is a great segue into one of the questions as you are talking about educating boys. There was a question in the chat box that says, what are the chances of starting this education of fathers and future fathers in high school?
Yeah, I love that. I actually saw that. My technological advancement, I was able to, I peeked at the chat. I was going to look for the title, but I think that's a great question and point, really. So we did a program through MGH in Revere, a pretty diverse area of Boston, Revere High School. And I'm forgetting the name of what we called it, but it was a pilot. We created a pilot, like the father or the dad you'll become or something. But essentially we piloted a program in a high school that addressed fatherhood. And we did it in single gendered groups, and we did it in multi-gendered groups, and sort of tried out different things. The long and the short of it is, it was wildly exciting, and we never turned it into a full program. There are organizations that do that. And one I'm thinking of as Mentors in Violence Prevention, MVP, but that's sort of similar but different. The point is, what was so wild about it was the boys and the girls, the the range of kids, everybody was pretty much the theme that came out of it was, wow, like we've never talked about this. We have, and we did it through the health class. We talk about, there's sex ed, there's, some schools have more wellness, better wellness curriculum, but to look at what does it mean to be a dad? What are the qualities that a good father has? What did you learn? And another fascinating dynamic was the girls watching guys talk about their relationship with their fathers gets me choked up. Sorry. So, but I will add to that, it should start much earlier. And I have film clips that I can make available. And I'm going to actually, of a documentary I started a long time ago. Now it's more like pieces, a web series called How Marriage Problems Start in Kindergarten. Gender Traps, How Marriage Problems Start in Kindergarten. And what we did is we went in and talked with different groups of K through third grade kids, talking about all of these topics about what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, why are these things specific. And we did that with young kids, then with middle schoolers, high schoolers, and then we followed 3 couples through therapy. And one of the central sort of pieces of this film, which I am going to make available, is that we did a live discussion sort of audience with a live audience between Bell Hooks and Terry Real. And if you don't know Terry Real, R-E-A-L, highly recommend checking out his work. He has actually a new book coming out. His first book was called I Don't Want to Talk About It, Overcoming the Secret Legacy of Male Depression. Must read for anyone in education, mental health, gender, anyone who cares about these issues. It's a phenomenal book. Bell also, at the time, had just written a book, which I think is not as well known, but you should know about it in terms of this topic, called The Will to Change. The Will to Change. That's the title. The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love, I believe is the subtitle. It's phenomenal. And so we had the 2 of them in discussion about, all of these topics. So it really does need to start early, the education of human qualities and connection. All right, I'm talking. That was a long answer. Well, okay.
No worries. One more question.
Yes.
John, it says, did your study look at boys raised by only women or mothers without much or any father figure influence? And how does that affect their ability to be a father or how they process masculinity?
So, that's a huge and a great question. I was not citing a study, that was a pilot program and a film that I mentioned. And we will talk about that more, but the short answer is, in my experience and what I know of the research, is that, what matters is that boys and girls, that children have access to men, that they have different father figures, if you will, and that if they don't have a biological father in their lives, as so many don't, that it makes a huge difference for them to have, again, important men in their lives. And in terms of the fathers they want to become, and subsequently become, I grew up with my mom was a single mother for many years, and went through very difficult divorce when I was young. And, I swore up and down I was going to do better than my dad. And the reality is while I did end up having a stepfather come into my life, she also did a good job of having other men around me that I could really see that there's different ways to father, there's different ways to be a man. So the research is pretty clear, which I don't love this research, but it's good to know that that, kids really need one person that's crazy about them. They need one parent that is absolutely nuts about them. I'd like to say they need more, not even just two. On that note, great reference. Bruce Feiler's his name. He wrote a book called Council of Dads, and he just wrote another book about life transitions. Bruce Feiler, I think he's a New York Times writer, but the Council of Dads is his story. He got diagnosed with cancer, and it was pretty advanced, and he started to prepare for his death. And he created a council of dads around, because his two daughters were very young. So he had one friend of his that was gay and that, was really into the arts, and his, they talked about his job was to play that role in his daughter's life. Then he had a friend that was very outdoorsy. So he created sort of different versions of manhood, of fatherhood around his daughters. It's an incredible story. And the good news is the cancer went into remission, and he's cancer free. So a council of dads. Okay. What do I got here? 12:40. Okay. 15 minutes. Yeah. 14 minutes. Okay. I hope that answered your question. Here we go. Yeah. All right, cool. I'm going to have to blaze through the research, because here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about these qualities: self-awareness, understanding, courage, emotional courage, and then flexibility and adaptability. Okay. Because things are changing, right? We saw it with COVID. All of a sudden, there were more dads at home. The good news, one study out of Harvard, what is the project called? I'm forgetting. But they found that dads felt more connected to their kids. We also know that it brought to light in a big way the imbalances, the inequities that still exist majorly at home, and that women end up doing still much more of the childcare, much more of the housework, and that's changing, but not fast enough. So big, the quality being adaptable and flexible, and understanding that my role as a father needs to change. That's a critical quality, and that's just one small example. So let's see. I'm going to show you a short video, and then I want you to see, just if you can pick out where you see these qualities sort of happening or spoken, just make note of it, because I think, and what you're going to see is a short piece I did about the power of groups, of group education, of fatherhood groups. There's two different organizations that I follow, but we're going to do a bunch of the exercise and activities. The stuff they're talking about can be done individually as well. So this is just a group model, but here we go. Oop. How was it showing up?
It was iffy. It was like my third try.
Yeah, so it took a while to learn.
Yeah, I think it's more of that ego, accepting help, learning how to be, the proper father. No one really wants to sit there and admit it, that they need help. But yeah, I'm glad I came today. Today was my first group. I liked it. I'm going to be back. And, we had talked earlier about, the ways people are brought up and they're not really taught the right things, Like I was saying earlier, someone asked me, how did I learn how to be a father? Well, I'm just doing the exact opposite of what I was brought up, it really doesn't get too far. So I'm really looking forward to this group. When we were younger, we used to talk about, we had children, you know, we were dads. We didn't want to be like our dad was. We wanted to be better fathers. And both of us have gone and done that. In doing this work, I realized that I think what I'm doing is I'm helping families to become the family I wanted. You know, I'm helping men to become the father that I wanted in my own lifetime. This was the old model of fatherhood. The fathers have power over their children's families. And the question they asked was, how can I control them, right? And in this model, fathers had dominance, right? And he always had the last word. So if father wins, someone has to lose, right? And that produces fear. How many guys are figuring that father? Raise your hand. My name is John O'Neill. I'm director of the Nurturing Fathers program at the Family Nurturing Center of Massachusetts. We're located in Dorchester, Mass. I've been here now a little over 6 years, almost 7 years. And I began working with fathers actually back in 1999. And the question we ask is not how can I control them, but how can I help them? Help them to do what? Help them to become healthy, whole, and complete. Help them to grow in their way. I see these groups as a place where men can reassess their roles as men and fathers, you know, and kind of sound off each other, you know, to find their way. And for many guys, it's the first time that they've ever come into any place, any circle, and talked about fathering. You know, when guys get together, what do we talk about? Women, sports, you know, who can do what the most, you know, guys always measure. Rarely do we come together as guys and just talk about fathering, you know, and our children.
I like this class, man. Like today, before I come over here, I told somebody, she's like, where you going? I'm like, I'm going to my parenting class. And she was laughing. I'm like, she more happy than me. I'm like, what's going on with you? She's like, oh, I never did that in my life. I'm like, yeah, but I'm doing it. You know what I'm saying? Now I know how to talk to my son, how to, you know what I'm saying, disrespect him and all that, just stuff like that. So that made me a better father. That's what I'm here for.
One of the biggest things that I could probably say that I learned here was patience. And, you know, I've been going through fighting for visitation for my daughter now for almost 9 months. And it takes patience. It does. Just over this past 10 weeks, I'm actually on a verbal communication with my kid's mother, where we don't argue. We agree now on a couple things, which is huge. You know what I mean? We're coming up March 7th, and she's agreeing with me on the visitation schedule.
Wow. Everybody in here got something. Some people's worse, some people's less worse, whatever. So I think that's helped me to see just the able to relate to everybody going through it, whether it's the course or DCF and all that. So that's helped me a lot, and it's helped me to really pay attention more as a father to how I father my son, not just act respond if he's bad. Man, you know, it's like I remember John said to him. So I try to talk to him, you know, but yeah, so it's helped me out. It's helped me to be more serious. I was already serious, but you know, it's helped me to be more serious in raising my child and wanting to give him a good life and be a good father.
In the course of these 13 weeks that we're together, you'll see a guy have that moment, you know, that aha moment where he gets it. Oh, I get it. And then he'll spit it back to you, you know, and you know he got it. For me, that's a thing of beauty.
I was at DHS, and they were walking by with my son, and I was in one of the little rooms, and I was screaming, flipping out, and I just couldn't understand what they were doing, how they were taking my son from me. And the whole time I was screaming and hollering, they ended up walking by with my son. Well, after I calmed down a little bit, they told me I could see my son. So I went into this other room, calmed down for a little bit, and they brought him in. And the first words were out of his mouth was, "You scared me, Dad." And that really, really hit home. And like a couple hours later is when someone suggested Strong Fathers Group to me. So I had a couple hours with my son, and I'm just trying to tell him that he don't ever have to be afraid of me. But the whole time, it really felt like a lie because I didn't have anything under control. It really felt like I had to change something in my life, the way I was. And if you were to ask anybody, they would just say I was a great father. Behind closed doors, was I really meeting my child's needs? And every time me and her fought, he would run. And I figured he was just running because it was loud and stuff, but really it was, I scared him. And that wasn't, for me, it didn't sit well when I realized and I had to face, you know what I mean, what I did. I think I'm becoming, each group, I think I get closer and closer to being, you see the coffee mug, best dad ever, greatest pops, or, I want one of those, but I don't want one given to me. I want to earn it. That's why I come here.
You saw behind the curtain there for a second. Jaira, we good?
You're
All
good.
People heard, saw everything?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we have a few moments. What'd you see? I'd love to hear just a few, again, thinking about this idea that we're undergoing transformation, that this is a time of transformation and change, and particularly fathers' roles, men, how that relates to women and children and families and work. What did you see being sort of embodied in that? Because change is hard, and I don't want this to paint. This isn't meant to paint like it's emotional to me, but to paint any kind of Pollyanna. Guys are great, but I worked with some of those guys, and I can tell you, some of them were very scary and as a man, and when I first met them. And I think that, watching transformation, it's gut-wrenchingly difficult, period. So time of transformation, change is hard, but ultimately worth it. And I think that's what we're banking on. And that's why you all play such a key role. So what'd you see real quick?
I see here in the chat box.
Yeah, please.
It says, takes emotional courage to acknowledge change. Also, transgenerational changes.
Totally.
They know that they don't want to do what their dads did, but they don't know what that means. Yeah,
it's funny, it was the first thing I wrote down. The first guy, especially, he was like, and I hear that a lot. The only thing I know is they'll say, my dad was great. He helped me realize what not to do, the double negative, which is sad, but I agree. It takes enormous courage and awareness, right? To realize like, hey, there's a different way that I want to be, that I can do.
Also see a comment that says insightful support for fathers. At the same time, fathers seeing their roles in leadership and parents in their homes, their roles as leadership. So amazing to see men who were raised to be one way have the courage to feel what their children were feeling and make the change.
That's really, yeah, it's very profound to feel what their children were feeling, which again goes back to the importance of empathy and understanding and the courage to look at that. And I can say as a father myself, my son is currently going through enormous difficulty with anxiety and a legacy of, in my family, of addictions. And you know, it's really hard to face what he's feeling and, you know, let alone have empathy for my own self as a child and the father that came before me and my grandfather and the generational empathy that's and change that's needed. A couple more, one more. Flexibility, adapt. I mean,
Also seeing their ego was a big part in their behavior choices, that they were hurting their child. It was a safe place for men to understand how they are impacting their kids, a chance to talk through how to be positive influences.
Yeah, which is, yes, and rare. Like John said in the facilitator, John O'Neill said, like, you know, there are, and it's true, there are very few places, and again, part of this goes back to sort of what we learned as boys growing up about support and help and the, you know, the sort of go it alone mentality. And I'm speaking very broadly and generally here, but I think we have plenty of evidence to show that that is an unhealthy way to live and it's unsustainable. So what I think is also hugely important here, and it's been said in really in most of those comments, is that these dads and the dads that thousands that I've met with, interviewed, ran groups with, read about, etc., there is a theme, and I wrote a book about this called The Modern Dad's Dilemma, how to stay connected with your kids in a rapidly changing world. The theme is they want something different. And if you think about it, transformation really kind of begins with a vision, or somewhere in the beginning of transformation is a vision. You know, for the LGBTQ community, that vision was, hey, I deserve to be treated like everybody else. I deserve human rights. I deserve to be a parent. Or for, you know, women today that are wrestling with equal pay. And, you know, that transformation starts in many ways with some pain. It gets unbearable, but it's also about having a vision of how I want it to be different. Don't necessarily know what that looks like always, but I know I want it to be different. So hopefully that was clear in here. And it is, I would argue, representative of the broader transformation that we are you know, under, and I would also say there's no guarantee it's going to happen. So that's sort of a general comment, but that's why we're doing, you know, why organizations like the First 3 Years values this topic, because we got to look at it, we got to talk about it, we got to see what we can do. So thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. I'm right up against, I'm over. I knew it would happen. I guess I sort of made it happen, didn't I? The research, I will come back to this in the workshop and actually give you some of the exercises and conversations that you just saw, like how those guys got to those places. We're going to go over some of the, again, the practical ways to do that. Do I even bother with the research now?
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit in the workshop if you don't mind. That would be amazing.
That's better to, yeah, I'll just let people go. I know I will come back and we'll start there, okay?
Perfect. I'm going to share my screen for just 1 second.
Can I just say,
while we
sorry,
transition.
can
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
interrupt? I forgot to say the final point that is so important is that all of you, and I mean this, it's so important, you being here, you thinking about this, you working with the families that you work with, you play the most important role, I would argue, the most important role in engaging, educating, and really helping to make the word family be more inclusive and be specifically inclusive of the father figure in that child's life. Kids do better when they have a dad that's involved. Doesn't have to be involved in, there are certain things, ways of being involved that are better than others. But what is most important, more important than time, or even living situation, what's most important is the quality of that relationship. And that's what I think you all have a tremendous opportunity to do is to help dads and help families understand that.
Yes, thank you so much, John. I absolutely appreciate you saying that. And for our attendees, we are now going to take a break. Our workshop session will begin at 12:30 Central Standard Time. Please do leave this webinar and join the workshop meeting link. It has been emailed to you, but is also placed in the chat box for your reference. And again, before you log off of this session, please be sure to type your name and your email address in the chat box to receive credit. I hope each of you have a wonderful break.